Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Monroe, and the focus is foreign deals. We'll start actually in the year 1799, not in foreign territory, but back in Virginia, where James Monroe has just been elected the governor of his state. In fact, he serves 3 one-year terms, leaving that position in early of 1803. At this point, what happens? Well, what typically happens when he gets out of a job, a president calls on him to go do a job for him. And this was his friend and mentor, Thomas Jefferson, who's now the president of the United States, who was really concerned about something happening on his western border. This is the territory called Louisiana that Spain has been in charge of for many, many years, but Spain has just ceded that territory back to France. And this is a shock to President Jefferson. Why? Because France is now being run by the dictator Napoleon, the emperor who has colonialization thoughts, it seems like, at almost a whim, and now Jefferson is afraid that he's going to try to colonize this part of North America, and in particular, it is putting at risk the western territories that rely on the Mississippi River for connection between eastern and western parts of the United States. So Jefferson is really concerned about Napoleon, and he wants to do something about it, and he needs an emissary to go to France and try to work a deal. He sets his sights on his friend James Monroe, and he sends him a letter that says, in this situation, we are obliged to call on you for a temporary sacrifice of yourself to prevent this greatest of evils in the present prosperous tide of our affairs. I shall tomorrow nominate you to the Senate for an extraordinary mission to France, and the circumstances are such as to render it impossible to decline because the whole public hope will be rested on you. And he continued, in flattering Monroe to try to get him to take the job. Some men are born for the public. Nature, by fitting them for the service of the human race on a broad scale, has stamped them with the evidences of her destination and their duty. Well, how can you say no to that? It's Jefferson, first of all, his friend and mentor, this flattering remarks. Okay, I'm going to go to France and see what I can do about Louisiana. His charter was to try to buy New Orleans, the mouth of the Mississippi River, to at least at a minimum guarantee access for the United States to ship goods down the Mississippi and out into the Gulf of Mexico, where it could go to the Europe or it could go to the east coast of the United States. That was his charter, go buy New Orleans. And he had to work with Robert Livingston, who was the minister to France at the time, and their job was to work together. Well, when Monroe arrives in France, it turned out that Napoleon has changed his mind. And he not only is willing to sell New Orleans, he's willing to sell all of Louisiana to the United States. He said, irresolution and deliberation are no longer in season. I renounce Louisiana. It is not only New Orleans that I will cede, it is the whole colony without any reservation. I renounce it with the greatest regret, but to attempt obstinately to retain it would be folly. Napoleon is giving this gift to Livingston and Monroe. They can't believe their luck. This is beyond their charter, beyond their instructions, but they're not going to turn down this opportunity to buy all this land, over 800,000 square miles. It literally doubles the size of the United States for $15 million, less than 3 cents of an acre. This is a great deal. They sign it, and they send the Louisiana Purchase Treaty back to the United States. Well, Jefferson has some constitutional concerns about this. He gets over them, he submits the treaty, and the deal is done, and everybody back in the States is really happy. The problem is there's somebody who's not that happy, and it's James Monroe, because there's a hitch in the deal. When Monroe made the deal, he believed it wasn't just for that territory on the western part of the United States called Louisiana, but part of Louisiana, in his mind, was also Florida, which was actually 2 separate regions, East Florida and West Florida, because as Monroe read the original treaty documents that gave that territory to France in the first place, it was all one package. And so by his reading, when Spain ceded all of the Louisiana territory back to France, it had to include Florida. So he thought he bought Florida, both Floridas as well. Well, King Carlos of Spain says, not so fast. France was not part of what I ceded back to Florida, rather, was not part of what I ceded back to France. You can have all that other stuff on your western border, but I'm keeping Florida. Well, Monroe is distressed about this, and he actually spends the next several months going back and forth, Spain and France, trying to work this deal, because what he thought he's already bought the Floridas. Eventually, they appeal to Napoleon. He's really the only one who can have a final say in this. And Napoleon basically punts, I'm not getting involved in this mess. If the United States can't work this deal with Spain, then tough luck. Florida's going to have to stay with Spain, apparently, and that's what happens. Monroe, again, is distraught, but he'll get Florida. It'll take him another 20 years. He'll be president of the United States at the time, and of course, we'll cover that in a future episode. Now, Monroe's tenure in Europe is not done because after he successfully negotiates the Louisiana Purchase, President Jefferson nominates him to be the minister to the court of St. James, the minister to Great Britain. So he travels across the channel, takes on that responsibility. And again, this is a perilous time. Seems like a lot of perilous times as far as when France and Great Britain were concerned on the United States. It always affects American shipping, and in particular, the really evil practice that the British had called impressment, where they would board American ships, commercial ships, and go on and say, you know what, you're a British citizen, even if they couldn't prove it, and they would impress them, which is a fancy word for saying kidnap them, and place them into the British Navy. And this was actually a fairly common practice, and the Americans really were at their wits' end because they didn't have a navy sufficient to stop it, and so it was continuing with impunity. So Monroe's main task in negotiating a treaty with the British was to get him to stop impressing American sailors. Well, in this, he is unsuccessful. He's joined in his negotiations with William Pinckney, and it's not easy because British governments are falling left and right during this tough time for them. They have to deal with 6 foreign secretaries over 18 months trying to negotiate a deal. They do come up with the Monroe-Pinkney Treaty, but it is silent on impressment. And when Monroe later communicates that he felt the treaty was about all that could reasonably have been expected, and that at least they had sustained the attitude they took with dignity, and by this arrangement they will terminate a controversy not in favor of themselves alone, but of neutral rights with some degree of credit. He was trying to put as good a face on it as he could, but frankly, it wasn't good enough for President Jefferson and Secretary of State Madison. Without impressment in the deal, they refused to even submit the treaty for the little things that Monroe was able to get. They weren't even going to submit the treaty to the Senate. They buried it. Monroe is upset. He's mostly upset at Madison. He blames Madison for sort of this public rebuke of this treaty that he negotiated. And he and Madison, who've been longtime friends, are actually estranged then for some period of time. Well, Monroe's tenure in Europe ends in 1807. He comes back to the United States with kind of a mixed record in his foreign deals. Obviously, Louisiana Purchase, greatest individual moment of the entire Jefferson presidency, double the size of the country. This is a big win, and Monroe had his hand in it. He's obviously disappointed about not being able to have Florida be part of that, so that was sort of a mixed case. And then, of course, basically a failure in Britain because he was unable to negotiate a treaty that the president was willing to submit to the Senate. So foreign deals for James Monroe, kind of a mixed record. But that is James Monroe and Foreign Deals from the life of James Monroe. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.